On this episode of Edge of the Web.
And I believe the most overlooked piece is the engagement. And then the one that everybody goes after that is kind of is part of why the consumer sentiment is a little bit down on digital is conversions, because most people get on social ads and all they want to do is run conversion ads.
Right.
Engagement ads, in my opinion, in my experience, is the single most important component of your advertising, because this is where you build the know, like, and trust factor.
Your weekly digital marketing trends with industry trend-setting guests. You're listening and watching Edge of the Web. Winners of Best Podcast from the Content Marketing Institute for 2017. Hear and see more at edgeofthewebradio.com. Now, here's your host, Aaron Sparks.
All right, Traci Reuter, she's the founder and CEO of Divine Social, believes that the entrepreneurs and businesses can change the world, and her mission is to support them along the way. She's passionate about helping these business owners build and grow their brands, and can actually better focus on providing value to their customers and positively impacting the world. Traci is certified in all things related to Instagram and Facebook, and she also currently manages about $4 million in ad spend a year, and she also was a contributing author to the bestseller, The Ultimate Guide to Facebook Advertising. Let's see that book real quick.
Oh, here we go. Got it right here.
There's The Ultimate Guide right there.
Cool.
So,
yeah.
Contributing author there, third edition, and she's also a co-host on the Social Media Marketing Happy Hour podcast. So, again, welcome to the show, Traci.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so there was the official bio, right? So let's get into why the heck are you in Facebook advertising?
This is a really great question. And it wasn't something, that like I knew from a young age that this is what I was going to do. I actually started out in corporate America. I used to run a sales division of a little tiny company called AT&T, and did that for many years. And we had clients that ranged from, United Airlines and Motorola all the way down to Joe's Plumbing and everything in between. Now, some backstory, I was raised in a blue-collar family that mostly worked in factories, but I had this uncle who was an entrepreneur, and I watched him build something out of nothing, and I watched him for decades, and I didn't realize how much he inspired me until I was faced almost 2 decades ago, I was faced with a personal crisis that I wasn't able to work the 80 hours a week I was working at AT&T. I needed to make a change. My husband had gotten very ill. And so that's when I dove into the digital side of things. I went back to my marketing degree. I took my sales degree, and I started trying to find my way around. Spent a little bit of time feeling like I was groping in the dark, because going from offline to online, it's so different. I was marketing, I was marketing online before Facebook. So I feel like sometimes I feel like the older aunt, not the grandma, but the older aunt online. We've got so many people that, they were in diapers when I was starting this.
Yeah, exactly. That's all right, Traci. You're among friends. I was literally developing websites before the internet. I was developing websites for bulletin board systems. So I've got a rocking chair as well, so we can just kind of commiserate that. Keep on going. Keep on going.
Yeah. And so as I started diving into digital, I think because of my business background, I realized that as much as I loved social and it was so fun and so exciting, it was really hard to show a return on investment. And I'm just a numbers person, being with my degree and my corporate experience, I just felt like, I needed to be able to show clients that their money was going somewhere and they could get a return on it predictably. And it turned out, as I was learning everything about digital, I was really good at the complicated stuff. I was really good at SEO, and I was really good at advertising. But advertising, I remember the early days of Facebook pay-per-click. And when you could take $1 and make $1, or take $1 and make $10, and it just became, I'm going to be honest, very, very addicting. And so that's sort of the direction I started to go. But then I had this realization one day that I realized how much what my uncle did. My uncle started out with a pizza shop, and then bought the mall that the pizza shop was in, and then bought a piece of property and went on to become a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate investor. But the big lesson in that for me was what an entrepreneur, like what a decision to take a risk to start a business and build a business, how that can change their life, their family's life, their community.
Absolutely.
And that's when I just was like, it was like all the bells went off in my head that I could serve that community, that I could actually take my superpower and serve that community. And that's sort of not sort of, but that's how Divine Social was born. It was born out of that desire to be able to take my superpower and partner up with these amazing entrepreneurs who risk it all in some cases to try to take something amazing and put it into the world. And that's why we do what we do. So I'm very, very passionate about doing things right. Not black hat, not this gray area that we're seeing that's causing some of the issues on digital today, but it's just been an incredible, incredible journey, and it's been so much fun to be able to get behind some of these great entrepreneurs.
Yeah, at the same time, would you recommend entrepreneurism to anybody that you come across?
No, it is not for the faint of heart.
You better believe it.
It is not for the faint of heart. So that's why I'm even, Aaron, more passionate about it, because I understand that it takes a special person to do it. And it is a significant risk. It's hard on everybody, their family, their kids, their friends, like it's tough. And so, it's whenever we can find that right partnership, it's just such a cool thing to be able to help them to magnify their reach and amplify their impact.
There you go. It takes a bit of grit, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
All right. Well, what we're going to do here is unpack for our listeners here a key concept that you brought forth and you've been championing, understanding how to develop the social media strategy for that ideal customer. We really wanted to dive in because your organization is strictly a paid social media advertising agency, right?
That's correct. Yep. That's all we do. We are, first and foremost, we're social media advertising strategists. Like we're very focused on the customer journey and how do you architect a process to take people from complete stranger to have them fall in love with you. And it's very different, right? It's very
and not
different.
Get creepy and not get stalky, right?
Right. And not be like the person who, says, hey, we just met, let's get married.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. Right. And so we're very focused on that. And our platform of delivery is primarily Instagram and Facebook. And so that's all we do. That's all we focus on. And we feel very strongly about some of the things we've been working on.
We've been interviewing a number of agency owners for a long period of time, and we're starting to see this more and more repeated, that the specialists are deep diving in a key platform and very, very narrowing their focus on key deliverables, as opposed to agencies that are doing everything for everybody and tepidly getting into different tactics. I mean, what you're seeing now is the separating of the wheat from the chaff, that you can't do everything well. You literally got to focus, especially as the more nuanced and more complicated these advertising platforms are getting. You got to be able to focus your full intent and skill into a particular area. Wouldn't you agree?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, in the beginning, if I look back on my journey, there was a time where it was like, a client would ask, can you do this? And you'd be like, yes, I can do that. Sure, I can take care of that for you. I'll do your email. And to be quite frank, we as a team know a lot. I won't say a lot. We know quite a bit about a lot. But in order to really do what we do well at a level of excellence, and one of our core values is excellence, the only way to really do that is to shut everything else out. And so it took some maturing on my part as an agency owner to be able to start saying no. But I'll tell you, when I started to draw the line in the sand, not only did our value go up, our clients' results improved, because it's very, very difficult in today's digital environment to stay on top of that silo that we're in, let alone trying to stay on top of everything.
Yeah.
So it's definitely been something that I've been very thoughtful about making the decisions to do what we do. And there's a couple of things that I do consider bringing in because it does make sense, and we consult on it a lot, like customer conversion rate optimization. Like we consult on that. We consult on funnels a lot, but we consult on it. We don't build them. We don't do those things. We know enough to impact the sphere that we're in, our zone of genius.
And you have to, because you're bringing that audience with that atmospheric, with the imagery, with the connection that you have to be able to carry that water further into the landing page. But giving it to somebody else is a sign of maturity. And in the digital agency space, there was a land grab for the longest time. Web developers all of a sudden said they were doing SEO. That was the bane of my existence. I've been doing this for a long time. I could not stand that all of a sudden a web design company now has a SEO service where they didn't know what the heck they were doing. And we've inherited such crappy campaigns here at Site Strategics of sites that were launched sites that were launched even with robots.txt blocking searches. But I mean, along with it, I mean, just terrible SEO, terrible content writing on these sites, and you just want to go back to these companies and say, what were you thinking? Did you realize you were harming your customer just because you were trying to grab some additional dollars and additional service?
It's exactly right. It's harming, and we've got a client that we're in the process of bringing on. And when they came to me, they said, we really feel like there's a huge opportunity for us on social ads, but we've run some campaigns and they didn't do well. And so, my first thing is, well, let me look at them. And so when I looked at them, I was like, who ran this for you?
There you are. Yep.
It was their web design firm that did it. And I said, this is absolutely, the fact that you sold anything from this ad is a miracle. That tells me that if we did it right, we could actually grow and scale your business. But it's dangerous. It's we shouldn't. I mean, one of the things I think every day is, how can I make decisions I make for my agency? How can I make decisions about our whether it's our pricing structure or the offerings that we have? How can I make sure that it's a win-win? Because I see too much in the marketplace that we're just trying to get a land grab and we're not doing it well. I promise you, you can slap up ads, for a client if you're a web developer or an SEO agency, but you will never do it as well as an agency that all they do is social advertising, because it's totally different. Just totally different, and vice versa. I could do an email sequence, but I guarantee you it won't be as good as an email marketing agency.
You're absolutely right. If you anyway, we can put a post-it on this one. This sounds something we could commiserate on.
I feel very strongly about this.
Well, I mean, let's get back to the task at hand. Is focusing on a social media marketing strategy. And developing, I mean, in your words, a foolproof methodology here. But first and foremost, you have to be able to identify and define the ideal customer as it applies to your campaign. So let's talk about that ideal customer. Can you explain the steps to identify a business's ideal customer?
Oh, the steps. Well, I mean, this is definitely something that surprises me on a regular basis, Aaron. We get these clients that are very well-established companies, and they say they know their ideal client, but they when we start to dig in, they don't necessarily. I think some of it starts on just a real basic level, right? With the demographics. Is it men? Is it women? Is it children? Is it elderly? Is it, just the real basic stuff. But then it starts to get deep into the psychographics. And this is something that, I think from a social advertising standpoint, going back to the whole topic of data, truly understanding your ideal client from a psychographic standpoint. What are their likes? What are they dislike? What are they, what podcasts are they listening to? What TV shows are they watching? Like, when you start to get into that and you really, really understand that, then you can build a foundation from there. And some businesses are going to have multiple, but the problem is when you try to take the multiple ideal client and lump it into one, that's when your advertising is missing the mark. It's mediocre at best. Your copy is lukewarm. It's just never hitting the mark. So I think it's, again, going back to starting with some of the basics, demographics, and then diving into what are the psychographics. Just really taking the time to getting to know that person. And we actually, my goodness, when we take on a new client, I have a dedicated person on staff that spends close to 15 hours just researching the psychographics of our client's ideal prospect. And we end up coming back to them with information they never even thought of.
There you go.
So it's pretty powerful stuff.
You have to, and you can't skip past that particular step. That is crucial. That is foundational. And again, it's a shocking scenario whenever we hear stories of agencies that don't take the time to isolate that information. So you're talking user personas, obviously. You're talking understanding sales cycle as well.
Well, sales cycle as well. I mean, there's a couple of different things that are involved with this. The one example that jumps to mind is another client that we recently took over. And one of the things we found when we were doing this research, her response was, my ideal client is between the ages of 25 and 65. Okay, it's kind of a big jump. And as we started digging in and really looking at the data and really understanding all of this, she does have that is her ideal client does fall into that, but there's two different two different clients.
Mm-hmm.
There's the 25 to 40-year-old, and then there's the 40 to 65-year-old. And they have totally different needs, desires, wants. And what's interesting is that prior to working with us, the client was sending the same messaging to a 25-year-old woman as a 65-year-old woman. And as a woman somewhere in between there, I can guarantee you that the messaging that goes to a 25-year-old doesn't apply to me, and vice versa. So it's okay to have multiple segments. In fact, sometimes that's the key to scaling. That's truly the key to scaling on social. But you've got to start with really getting specific. And sometimes we're afraid to, right? For that whole FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. If we get too specific, we're afraid we're going to miss stuff. But the opposite is actually true. The more specific you get, the more likely you are to get to not only capture that business, but capture the business around it.
Do you find that marketers are afraid of experimenting, actually putting themselves in the space of deciding these particular key foundational elements?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think that people that, like I mentioned earlier, Facebook becoming, Facebook advertising becoming the new biz op.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times they don't have the business acumen to understand how to do this and to take the risk.
Okay.
So, I mean, I definitely see it there, but I've got some peers that are very, very talented and they get it. Like they have enough confidence in themselves. They've done this enough that that they're actually in a position where they're leading the client. And that's the thing that we feel very strongly about, that when we work with clients, we're partnering with them so that we're not that we're taking a leadership role, because ultimately it's their business, right? But we have to be confident that we know what we're doing so that we can take those risks, because marketing is testing. No matter how confident I am right now talking about these strategies, and no matter how many times I've done them and tested them and they've proven to be true, it's still a test, because tomorrow something could change and we have to be flexible enough to pivot. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And on top of that, as you're dealing with different business owners and CEOs, you're also dealing with type A's that are trying to define themselves and make sure that they present to not only their own business owner, but to you, that they know their audience, and what you come to them with is data-oriented, provable analysis. And a lot of times they're wrong in their own assessment of the consumers, right?
So often. I've got a client that taught me a lesson. He's a performance coach, and when we took him on as a client, we thought he had his marketing dialed in. We're very, very surprised to find out that he didn't, and that happens a lot. Where the client on the outside looks one way, right? And it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. You get to see the man behind the curtain or the woman behind the curtain. But in this case, because this client is a very high end performance coach, he sat me down and he said, "Look, there's three types of entrepreneurs. There's the product entrepreneur. That's going to be Steve Jobs, focused on the product, making sure it's perfect, making sure everything about it is the best.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the customer experience, which would be the Tony Hsiehs of the world, right? Making sure, that, Jeff Bezos could be argued as a customer experience as well, right? Making sure that the customer experience is top notch. And then the third type is the marketing entrepreneur. And that's going to be, P.T. Barnum, right? That's going to be a Gary Vee. Those are entrepreneurs that think marketing all day long."
Yep.
And he said to me, he's like, "Look, I'm not a marketing entrepreneur. I'm a product guy." And that was so helpful for me, because from that point on, I started asking my clients, if you had to put yourself into one of these three, where would you go? Because that's helped me take on a stronger leadership role as a partner with my clients. Because if they tell me that their customer experience or their product, and they're not telling me their marketing, then I know that their brain doesn't work like my brain does.
Right.
Because all my brain thinks is marketing. I think marketing at the grocery store. I think marketing everywhere. So I think that helps too. Like I just felt like that day that he explained that to me was such a pivotal moment for me as a agency owner, both doing business development and really serving our clients, because I could step up and be a stronger strategist for our clients who don't necessarily, they know enough about marketing to be dangerous, but I know that I'm not going to lead them wrong.
Yeah, you got to match toe to toe with them, and that's why they're hiring you. So again, getting back to the foundational approach here of defining your ideal customer, taking in and getting input from the C-levels and getting input from those key decision makers is critical. But also getting into that psychographic segmentation. That's where your marketing artistic standpoint comes in. Is that you have to be able to break out personality, opinions, attitudes, interests, and hobbies. These are things that are not demographic in nature. These are assumptions. These are potential risks. And if you go at it with a marketing experimentation standpoint, you're not betting all the chips on one particular psychographic. You're going to test these things out, right?
Yeah, and so this is really where the data side of things comes into play, and it's I think it's what's so attractive still about Instagram and Facebook, and I think soon to be LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn's not quite there yet, but what's so attractive about all of that is you can test all of these different things. You can test all of this, and that allows you to be able to concurrently be testing maybe 10 different psychographics at once, so that you can spread your risk across all of that until you find a winner, and then you can start scaling from there.
There you go. So this is going to get us linkage into our next thought regarding the engagement content that is tied to those psychographic elements. Again, the demographic is there. You've got it pinned down. The psychographic elements. Now you talk about message to market matching, right? So unpack that for us.
Yeah. So one of the things that over the last several years of doing this and working, running millions of dollars of ads with a couple of pretty big brands as well, is I've broken out a strategy that I call the 3 pillars to successful social ads. And the 3 pillars that I believe every successful brand needs is they need to be building their audience. We just talked quite a bit about that, right? Mm-hmm. Building out your audience. The second, and I believe the most overlooked piece, is the engagement. And then the one that everybody goes after that is kind of is part of why the consumer sentiment is a little bit down on digital, is conversions, because mm-hmm. most people get on social ads and all they want to do is run conversion ads.
Right.
Now, engagement ads, in my opinion, in my experience, is the single most important component of your advertising, because this is where you build the know, like, and trust factor. One of the things I think that was coined by Bob Berg, who's an author. He's written a couple of books, The Go Getter, The Go Giver, like a couple of those, right? Mm-hmm. And so he says, all things being equal, people will do business with people they know, like, and trust.
Right.
And I used to teach my sales team back at AT&T that all the time, right? You've got to do business. People are going to do business with you if they know you, they like you, and they trust you. Well, there's one key component that Bob, he indirectly mentions, and I think it's called remember. So people, all things being equal, people do business with people that they know, like, trust, and remember. And this is where digital advertising can do a job that no other form, in my opinion, can do it as well. And that is staying in front of people on a regular basis, especially if the sales cycle is long. Okay. Now, you've got to understand, first and foremost, as a business, what is the average length of time it takes from somebody's first touch until they actually purchase? And the stats are something like 2% of all people purchase the first time they see an offer.
Right.
So what do you do with the 98%? Like, what do you do with them? And I see so many people that are only doing direct response, leaving so much money on the table. They're literally lighting dollars on fire. And that's when I come back to this engagement campaign. And the engagement campaign is designed and architected to give people value, to help them build up their level of trust, mm-hmm. their level of like, right? Their level of knowing, and then ultimately the level of remembering. And we like to follow along with Eugene Schwartz's 5 levels of awareness. I mean, if you've never read Breakthrough Advertising, even if you're not in advertising, read it. It's a great book. But the 5 levels of awareness essentially are taking people from completely unaware that they have a problem,
right,
to all the way to the top where they know that they have a problem, they know about your solution, and they're just waiting for the right timing. And so we craft these engagement campaigns that are value-driven only, Aaron. They're not asking for you to buy from them. They're just delivering value so that you can then remarket to those people to help push them through to that ultimate goal, which is usually to purchase. And so what we're finding, and I've got some really interesting case studies. I can pull one up, and I can't share it on my screen.
No, that's all right.
I can walk you through it because we just did a campaign. This is fascinating. We did a campaign knowing that a client was going to have a big launch. And we really pushed hard to put out really good, and this is the key, congruent engagement content that would lead naturally into the offer. And so we ran these campaigns, and they were just video view campaigns. We weren't asking the prospects to do anything except consume. And so the idea was to create fresh audiences that were highly engaged. So when the launch happened, what we did, and I love my team members in the reporting. I'm going to turn my head here so I can read the numbers to you. But we had 2 campaigns, and one was going after all of the clients' warm traffic, mm-hmm. all of it, right? Website visitors, email list, fans, all of it. And we excluded that fresh engaged content. We excluded it. Okay. And then we ran a second campaign that only targeted that fresh engaged stuff. So check this out. We spent we spent $3,400 on the warm traffic. Okay. Not the fresh engaged. We generated 829 leads at $4.10 a lead. And we reached 125,000 people. So, okay, great. All right. Now, this blew my mind. So the fresh engaged stuff, we only reached 26,000 people. So less than a quarter, right? Like maybe an eighth of that audience. We spent $2,600. So we spent not quite $1,000 less, but we generated 1,003 leads at $2.59 a lead compared to the $4.10. Now, granted, we did spend money on that engagement campaign, but we spent very little because we were spending something like a penny of a video view. Like we were taking advantage of that traffic and we were only retargeting people who were highly engaged. Now, think for a second about the user experience. We didn't ask anything from them. We put something of value in front of them in their newsfeed, right? We interrupted them, but we interrupted them with something that was going to make their life better. And then we only came back with an ask of the people who actually showed an interest the first time and saw a dramatic, like if you look at the reach to conversion, it's dramatic, the difference between the two of them, not to mention the cost. So we just continue to see this, that the companies, the businesses, and the brands that really invest in this engagement pillar that I call it, we're seeing them win over and over and over again. Not just Aaron, here's the cool part. It's not just before. I get really excited about this.
No, go for it.
It's not just the engagement content before the ask. So the example I just gave to you, that was serving up engagement content before we ever asked them to do anything, right? So think about it this way. That would be taking someone on a date a few times before you ask them to marry you, okay? Right? So we call it pre-engagement. Now, the second time we use this engagement content that's really powerful is sometimes those people that go through the pre-engagement and get the offer don't take the offer.
Right.
So we architect out a series of post-engagement content, some touches after the fact. We come back with things like testimonials, frequently asked questions. One of the things that helped my sales team back in the day in AT&T excel is we were amazing at overcoming objections before they ever came up. And so we've been incorporating that philosophy into our client campaigns so that somebody goes to a webinar, somebody gets an offer to purchase something, whether it's on an e-commerce store. We have video content, or we have image content. We have advertisements that are overcoming objections before they ever come up. And that post-engagement content is also helping to mop up all of that 98% of the people that aren't buying the first time.
Right.
It's super powerful.
So what you're delivering is buyer's journey content. You're providing your brand as a utility to be able to understand more of what the consumer needs to know to be able to make it buy, make a decision. So now no longer are you trying to push for that upfront ask, that strong arming that we know time and time again now in the savviness of the digital consumer, they're just not going to bite. There's 2% or less type of engagement in that space. And you're coming alongside that consumer and advocating on behalf of them to be able to make a decision. And it's not just the solution of, hey, this is the brand, this is where you should be, because sometimes it doesn't fit that particular demographic or that particular psychographic. What you're serving is useful information for them to be able to trust the brand to a much greater degree than they've ever experienced before, right?
Correct. And the other thing that we're doing with all this is that we're taking into consideration the client sales cycle. And this is super important because if let's say you're a sub $20 e-commerce brand, right, your sales cycle is very short. But if you're selling a high ticket item, if you're selling an info product or a course or consulting, or you're an agency, your sales cycle tends to be very long. We had one client that came to us and he thought his sales cycle was 6 weeks. And after we really pushed him to get that data and to work with us on that, we discovered it was 8 months.
Oh, wow.
So 8 months. And so what we had to get very creative for how could we stay in front of these people to help, number one, make sure they didn't forget about them, during that 8 month period.
Sure.
And number two, architect a process to shorten that 8 month period. And so that, that's a big deal too, especially, when you start talking about social advertising and becoming cash flow positive. If you're not going to become cash flow positive for 8 months, you better be well funded.
Absolutely.
And that was very, very eye-opening to that client. And I think that there is a big divide. There's a big gap between people who are solopreneurs, they're building a business, they're maybe they're at that 300K or less in revenue versus brands that are, a million, 2 million, 5 million. Like there's a very big difference with how they understand their numbers and their sales cycle. And so, that's usually one of my first questions before we even take on a client is, do you know your sales cycle? And it's shocking to me how many people don't know, and they don't know their client lifetime value. They don't know those things. And a lot of agencies or freelancers or, Facebook ads people don't even know to ask those questions. Some of them do. There are plenty of good ones out there, but there's a lot more that have no idea. They don't know this stuff at all.
And that brings me to bringing me to the foot of the client themselves, and cautioning against clients really steering their own story and painting their own picture, because a lot of the times they don't know their own audience. They think they do. They think that they know their customer sales cycle or their psychographics. You really you want their contribution, but at the same time, I mean, it's a cautionary tale to just take the information from the horse's mouth and put an entire campaign around the client's perspective of themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, we always value, obviously, what the client, their client's experience. And we've got one client I can think of that she's our only client that writes their own copy. And
oh, wow.
We let her write her copy because social copy is actually very different. Usually we don't allow our clients to do it. But we let her because she knows her demographics and her psychographics so well. We then polish it and make it work for social ads. But she's a unicorn. Most people,
Yeah.
they know their clients fairly well, but they don't know them as well as they think they do. And part of that is because as a founder or a CEO or a business owner, you're trying to do everything. And I don't care what business you're in. It happened to me recently. I did a video not long ago, and I said, I think I need to have my marketing card stripped away because I looked at my own funnel and it was horrible. I couldn't believe how bad it was. And I should be I hope my clients didn't see this, but it's well, no, that's not your zone of genius. We're always better for other people than we are for ourselves. And I think that's why, whether it's, you need to bring in an outside consultant or an agency or a coach, we need, that's why we have mirrors, right? Aaron, we have mirrors to show us. So I think it is important. I do believe that, especially in the case of e-commerce clients, I do think it's really helpful if the founder has got in the trenches and has run their own traffic for a while, or somebody, at their C-level in that group. Because I do think that's really, really helpful for them to kind of understand the nuances of the platforms. I find that my favorite clients are the ones that have a working knowledge and have been in there. And then when we take over, they really can see whoa, look at what we've been missing. I didn't know that I didn't know that.
Right.
Those are the most fun. The ones that have no clue whatsoever, hand it over and still have no clue. Those aren't as fun to work with because they don't really understand the benefit of bringing in an expert.
Well, they also don't have the buy-in, is that they can easily dismiss Facebook advertising because I don't do Facebook. All of a sudden, now you're up against that wall that nothing sticks as much as because they don't understand the data, they don't understand the marketing tool, and then whenever you bring them the data, then it's anomalous to begin with, right?
Right. Yeah, we've had that conversation many times where it's so you don't do Facebook and you don't do Instagram, but your customers do, and and not all the time is the founder the ideal client. Sometimes it is, but yeah, that can definitely be challenging sometimes.
So, steering away from just taking the founder's story and actually marrying up the data, what are the next steps in the foolproof social advertising recipe there?
Well, the next step, the next step really is the conversions. It's the ask. Ultimately, this is what makes social ads so powerful, is to be able to generate a return on ad spend, right? If you can, we really like clients that we can invest $1 in advertising, we can make $1 or more out. Those are the best ones, right? And so the thing is that it's getting harder and harder to generate good return on ad spend. And so if you look at our formula, the 3 steps to successful social advertising. It's the audience, right? It's always building your audience. It's having your engagement campaigns, and then it's the conversions. And so, one thing that we always do is we always make sure that while we are perfecting, discovering new audiences and expanding on that, while we are really dialing in the engagement campaigns, we always have the conversion campaigns running out of the gate, because if not, what we've seen happen We've learned this the hard way, but what we've seen happen is the client's just not getting a return. And so you always have to make sure that there is some, whatever the KPI is that you're measuring success with, that's out there and running. So conversions is very, very important. It's what I would say 90% of the advertisers on Facebook are doing, and that's all they're doing. So that doesn't go away in our formula. It's definitely, it's always there, because that's what makes this lucrative. It's when you can marry those conversion campaigns, right? The traditional direct response.
Right.
Hey, sign up for my webinar. Hey, here's this great opt-in. Hey, buy this product, or hey, you left this in your shopping cart, come back and get it. Those are conversion ads. And if you can take that direct response style conversion ad and you can marry it with what I just talked about, with expanding your audiences and providing incredible value, those two things, those first two pillars, that's branding.
Yep.
Right? So if you can take, go ahead.
No, I mean, you're also building that trust. And I was going to ask you, we have to mature our thought beyond just the dollar in the bucket mindset. Is that the trust that you're building right there is again a bit abstract to so many businesses and so many companies that hire digital marketers. But this is where you're building momentum. If you can continue to bring good utilitarian content, good valuable content without the ask, right? Those two are key performance measurements, right?
They really are. And, so I don't know if you've ever listened to Gary Vaynerchuk talking about how he believes in the future, right? In a very short future, we're going to have these big brands, the Madison Avenue brands, right? The Nikes and the Adidas and the Coca-Colas and the, United Airlines, move their ad dollars from traditional TV networks and move them over to social advertising. And it's going to be harder for people like us to be over there. Mm-hmm. So, we've been hearing that. And I've had the privilege to run traffic and set strategy, to also set strategy for not a brand that large, but a fairly large brand in the arts and crafts space. Mm-hmm. They partner with Martha Stewart, and they're sold in Hobby Lobby and in some big spaces. And part of the reason I developed this process was through them, is through their, they had a deep enough budget. And I know most smaller companies won't have this kind of budget, but I watched what happened when they continually for 2 years invested just in the first two pillars. That's all they did. And I kept saying, why aren't we doing conversions? We're losing money. And they didn't want to do it. And, I'm the first person, as I get more mature, I'm very quick to say I made a mistake or I was wrong. And so I was wrong in pushing this client to do conversions. I mean, I think they would have been making money, but what I saw is by continually putting their ad dollars, and I'm talking about, it wasn't that big. It was like maybe 5 to 10K a month, which for some businesses, that's huge, right? But 5 to 10K a month, they were consistently for 2 years focused on building their audiences and just providing value. And that was it. Now, today, that client has, oh my gosh, we've 100x their ad spend, and they get a return on ad spend, meaning every time they spend $1, they get money back, right? So when we send someone to their company blog, not to their store, just their company blog, they make on average $8 to $10 every time we send somebody to that store. Yeah. Now, Aaron, I was just at a conference last week. I was at a natural foods conference, natural food products conference last week, and somebody from the front of the room said, you will never convert traffic on blog traffic. Don't waste your time. And I sat in the back of the room going, shut up, you're not the speaker. When you speak, you should be the one to talk about it. But I really believe it's because this particular CEO was he really understood the value of a highly engaged audience. And that's really where we developed this philosophy, and we've been testing it over and over again on big brands, small brands, and it just continues to work. Because here's the thing. Tactics are always going to change, right? That's why the beginning of our conversation talking about we only focus on Instagram and Facebook is because tactics change daily.
Right.
But strategies, overarching strategies, are things that are evergreen. And this particular strategy, this concept, this customer journey, this really adding value to people, the know, like, trust, and remember, these strategies will go the distance. And then within that, you can change the tactics as the platform changes. It's really that simple. And that's why we've just seen this over and over and over again with every client we work with. It's been pretty remarkable.
Well, where do you find those clients that have that level of maturity, understanding engagement, and not going for the gold all the time as a key factor of success? Because it's great to be able to preach to the pews of marketing, right? But
Right.
it doesn't have traction nearly as much as you'd like in the annals of the decision makers.
Well, I mean, honestly, it comes back to again what we were talking about earlier with having the maturity to say no to certain things. It starts in the business development conversation, and I think part of that is because I know I have a unique background in that I did run a sales division of a Fortune 10 company, so I have a sales background. So I do all the business development for my company, and so in those early conversations, I paint the picture of this philosophy, and either you're in or you're not, because that's how we do it, and so I do think it comes, if you're listening and you are an agency owner, or you're growing an agency or a consultancy, it starts with you really being confident, and I think some of my confidence comes from we just continue. I get someone that's willing to take a risk with me, we test it, it works, my confidence keeps getting stronger and stronger, to the point now you couldn't talk me out of this if you tried. So I think it does come down to being really, really clear with how you do things, and it's got to be a win-win.
And you got to push away from distractions and trying to dabble in other areas that are not your core strengths. And I mean, to the same degree as that product entrepreneur, I mean, they focused on their product and social agencies by and large, and they got to be able to bring different levels of marketing engagement. That's the only way to be able to deepen the relationship of your brand's customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And
what? Go right ahead.
It just, if you start with the end in mind, right, which is a win-win for you and the client, then you can't lose. You always, it's when it's a win for the client and a lose for you, or vice versa, that you're not going to be able to show up as the best version of yourself. Whether you're designing websites, or you're doing social ads, or you're doing SEO, you just have to be able to know that you do have the client's best interest in mind, and that should come across. You should be able to convey that, and have a strong leadership in what it is that you're doing. So.
We could certainly go on into the hours here talking about this information and these type of concepts. These are the core concepts of strong digital marketing strategy. There's certainly the recipe for success here, but would you just let the listeners, the digital marketers out there, know what are the key steps that you'd recommend just getting started into unfurling the engagement content sale, as opposed to just trying to get that conversion? What should they be looking at right now?
Yeah, so I would start again. It goes back to I love the book. If you haven't read it, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
There you go. Yeah.
Great classic book, and he talks in there about beginning with the end in mind. So one of the ways we decide what types of engagement content to use is we always start with what the ultimate goal is. It's when you slap up any content that this does not work. Okay. And I have a very, very good friend who runs probably 10 times more traffic than I do. And she and I had this debate, and it came down to the fact that it didn't work during the times that they didn't have congruent content. So start with the end in mind and start working backwards. So if the ultimate goal is a consultation, or if the ultimate goal is a purchase, what kind of content, like what kind of information would somebody need to know in order to get one step closer to buying? Is it helping them with a problem solution? What does that look like? And then from there, one of the things we do is we go through the client's existing assets, and we start digging around to see, like, is there anything that they've already done that talks about these kinds of things that we can repurpose? Quite often we can't. And so then we really instruct the client to create something, whether it's an article. We prefer video, because video just works so well these days. And creating some, it's almost like a bridge, right? It's a bridge from, I don't know who you are, to, oh my God, that was so amazing. I want to know more. I think back to when Amy Porterfield first came on the scene. Like, gosh, I feel like I'm aging myself again. Like, literally, she was a nobody. And I remember getting on her first webinar, and it was so valuable that I was like, take my money, take my $47 for your class. And so we know how to do that as marketers, right? We know how to create a very valuable webinar to then make the ask. Now, what if you took a piece of that webinar and pulled it out that was super valuable, that was teaching something, and you put it before that? Right. So start thinking it that way, moving backwards, begin with the end in mind and start moving backwards, and providing just value that you could literally, that that content you're putting out there is going to make someone's life better, whether they ever bought from you or not. Putting that goodwill content that is congruent with where you want to take them. And that's the key.
And that certainly aligns with what Google's looking for from websites, if they're actually providing content that benefits the consumers, as opposed to a constant, not bait and switch, but a constant ask in the space. If you're developing content and you're giving that content away for free, that's going to be useful. It certainly does help you on the website algorithm changes that we've seen recently in Google. All right, so. There's the final lessons there that we want to impart to our digital marketing audience. We always wrap up with our interview with a couple quick questions, Traci. First and foremost, what bugs you about your industry right now?
I may have alluded to it a few times in the call. I mean, I think right now there's so many people that, Facebook became the biz op of the last couple of years, and which I think in some ways it's really exciting that people can start a career in digital marketing, but it really bothers me when people are just calling themselves an expert when they don't really understand what's happening. And I see a lot of businesses that are getting burned, and so drives me absolutely crazy. But at the same time, I think those people that are out there trying to learn and get better, I mean, they should have the opportunity to do that. And so it's one of those things that I've got a love-hate relationship with that. So I admire the people for trying, but it's like, golly, just know your limits, know when you're in over your head and do what's right by the client.
Hey, but it tees up new business for you whenever they figure that out, right?
Yes, it sure does. Yeah.
Well, conversely, what excites you about your industry right now? And it can't be the same question or same answer.
Yeah, no, I think there's a tremendous opportunity. I'm super excited for the businesses that are going to get this concept, that are willing to take a portion of their advertising budget and invest it in branding, because we've really never seen these smaller companies take a branding play on social ads, right? Okay. And branding is not your logo, and it's not that stuff. It's like actually getting your message out there. And I think there is tremendous opportunity before some of these, Madison Avenue brands start to have an influx on the social platform. I think there is a window. I think it's tremendous. And the people who get it and really take advantage of it are going to absolutely crush it. And I'm excited for some of my clients that are starting to do that. So that's fun for us.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Well, we certainly wish you all the best in the world for your career and what you're doing for your clients. You're speaking the truth, speaking the gospel, and it's the no BS pursuit here. You got to be able to provide credible content for your brands, as well as be able to give away some engagement content and build that trust that we so need. There's a level of maturity that's happening. The consumers are savvy. They're on to the immature plays, and you have to build that relationship. However long that sales cycle is, you got to be able to give before you get it, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And the people that do that, the businesses that do that, they are going to win. So, I hope we see more and more of those brands that are going to be here for the long haul, be able to make those kinds of investments, to make those kinds of strategic moves and really reap the rewards for it.
Absolutely.
Fun to watch.
And if you're a business out there that is continually focused just on the ROI, let's talk about ROO, return on objective. Right? You're trying to get trust out there. You can measure trust. You can measure that engagement. You can measure time on page reading. You can measure those factors. Just don't go for the almighty dollar when you haven't built the bridge to be able to connect to your client.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, we certainly appreciate your time today, Traci. We want to make sure that all of our listeners know where to find you. On Twitter, it's Traci Reuter. On Facebook, it's Traci Reuter Social. LinkedIn is Traci Reuter. Instagram is Traci Reuter, and YouTube is Traci Reuter. You almost got the brand complete. What happened to the Facebook Traci Reuter?
Well, I have it. It's just my personal page.
Okay. Damn, we weren't supposed to give that away.
Been doing it a long time. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we wish you all the best in the world. Thanks so much for talking to us today and contributing into this space and really kind of giving us the skinny on exactly how to create that good core formula of success.
My my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome. More than welcome. All right. Thanks for listening to Edge of the Web Radio.com, and make sure that you listen on a regular basis to some of the older shows as well, because we are always looking back and just valuing our engagements with our guests. We certainly want to give a shout out to our colleagues at Site Strategics, including Jacob Mann on the wheel here. We also certainly want to appreciate our guest, Traci Reuter, because she unpacked a lot of great information here on the social advertising formula for success here. Make sure to check out all the must-see videos over at edgeofthewebradio.com. That's edgeofthewebradio.com. And we certainly want you to know about some changes here coming up in July. We're going to be moving our live show to Mondays at 3 p.m. Is that correct, Jacob? Gotcha.
That's correct.
And on top of that, we're going to be breaking out our news sections outside of the regular interview podcast, so you can get a quick bite of the Edge news, as well as dive into the interview as well as you deem fit. And we're going to be talking to a good number of people in the near future. We're talking to Joe Paluzzi here next week, right?
Yeah, next week. I can't remember if next week's Monday or Thursday yet.
I think it's Monday.
Okay.
July 1st is our Monday.
Yeah, that's our first Monday.
All right. I better be prepared.
Okay.
I can't have a long weekend.
Good thing it's before the 4th of July.
I'm saying. All right. So for everybody over here at Site Strategics, thanks so much. And be sure to rate, and review our podcast, our YouTube videos, and much more over at Facebook. Certainly want to have feedback on how we're doing for you, our audience. And if you want us to talk to somebody that we haven't yet, give us a shout. We'd be happy to get them in our crosshairs and get them on the show. So for all of us over at Site Strategics and Edge, thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week. Do not be a piece of cyber driftwood. Bye-bye.